Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Blue We're again, John Dave and myself. Going to look back over Leinster's victory against Ulster last weekend, all your Pro 14 action, and of course, look forward to Ireland's match against Scotland and the other Six Nation games this weekend. So, lads, we've sealed our spot in the Pro 14 or Pro 12 final in a couple of weeks' time with a 38-19 victory over Ulster. Quite a bit to discuss.
Really?
Well, where do we start? It's six cards shown by Frank Murphy during the game, and could have been more.
I was just about to say that. Could have been more. Ill-disciplined showing. Yeah, it was. I think it was 3 each, but one of theirs was red. Was it? Am I right there?
Yeah.
So that materially affected things for them. Obviously, losing a loose head prop for such a long period of the game. But I don't know what you do about that kind of thing. Like, I mean, I think the idea is that they're harsh on these contacts until teams cop on to stop doing it. But it seems that teams are not copping on to stop doing it, so they're constantly still having to give out cards the whole time. Where will it end?
Well, it does work. I mean, they did it. They were extremely strict on tackling in the air and tip tackles. If you recall, about 2 years ago, those were the big kind of, if you like, the big ticket items, and they didn't disappear from our game, but certainly tip tackles have pretty much gone. You still see it happen by accident, but the idea of it is gone completely. So, I mean, they were very strict on neck rolls, and neck rolls are kind of, they've kind of gone as well. You still see them again occasionally, but, not with the proliferation of them that there used to be. So I suppose it's about, enforcing behavioral change. And along the way to that omelette, there will be some eggs broken, and that's just what they're going to do. I mean, I don't think any of us would have been entirely either surprised or outraged if Jimmy O'Brien, for example, had seen red. I think he got what little leniency there was, he got. So obviously Warwick's was a red as well, because I mean, at the end of the day, despite the fact that I have no doubt there was no intention of him to do anything like make contact with the neck, he was trying to awkwardly fend off an incoming tackler. But at the end of the day, like I say, omelette and eggs.
What was a favourite tactic of our mate? What was his name? Came from Rugby League Australia to play for Leinster.
That's on.
Shagged off after 2 years now.
Ben Te'o.
Ben Te'o. That's him. He was very fond of, and he had a little thing on his arm. He used to wear a brace where he hurt his arm previously. He broke his arm previously, and he got it into many a fella's neck and face and gob in general. He was good at the forearm smash. So he wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes under the new regulations. I think the tip tackle thing is good for years, a lot more than 2 years ago. I remember
that. Yeah, no, you may well be right. No, I'm just saying, taking it as an example of how they found something they removed from the game, and they did it through the medium of cards.
It was interesting though, listening to Ferris on the commentary. I could sense his frustration as kind of, this game is
gone soft.
No, I don't think getting a head to the head is going soft, John. In whether, I think what he was just frustrated that these things happen in the course of the game, and they're not intentional, and it's very hard to change that, because think like if someone is going up for a high ball and you take the ankles off him and he falls from 6 feet in the air down, like that's obviously clearly reckless and dangerous. But if you're going into a challenge and your head happens to collide with the other guy's head, it's not intentional, and it's probably not even reckless. It's just something that happens. Like they call it in Formula One, a racing incident. And I can sense the frustration of people who have played it. It's very easy for people who've never played it to sit on the sideline and to say, oh yes, we have to stamp this out because it's a blight and it'll lead to all sorts of problems in the future. Of course it will. But if you have played rugby, these collisions are like they've been happening since the game was in its infancy 150 years ago. These things happen. And when Ferris played 10 years ago, or when we played 30 years ago or 20 years ago, you didn't have the same size of beasts running as fast into each other, but you did have head-to-head collisions. And it was just kind of like something that just happened. And then all of a sudden it's being legislated for to say, this is now a red card. I can understand the frustration, but they're the new laws that are laid down, and that's what you have to play to. So, deal with it sort of as well.
I think there is frustration with incidents that are like both of the ones in this match, like the Warwick one and the O'Brien one, that are clearly not intentional. And in another era, or not even another era, 12, 18 months ago, would have been yellows and no more. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to change behavior. And once they feel that they have that behavioral change in, then they'll go back to, okay, rugby incident. Then they'll allow that mitigation in. But what for this period, and I'd say it'll last maybe 2 years, they are clamping down on it hard, and they're clamping down on it heavy until they sense that there's a general behavioral change. I think ultimately the aim within the game, I don't know, I'm not speaking from any particular position of knowledge, is to take the tackle height below the armpits. I think that's ultimately the end game. And this is just a step along the way. They want to get rid of upright tackles. They want to replace, we've all seen them on YouTube, all those, fantastic hits videos. They want to get rid of the hit. They want to replace it with an actual technical tackle. And this is how they're choosing to do it, because they're obviously of the opinion that, right, we've told players not to do it, we've explained to them the dangers of it, and it's not worked. So we're just gonna card it out of the game.
Yeah, and I do see frustration of people who used to play it years ago. You've already made a point about people.
I see frustration. Not even people. I see frustration. Just that was set up to be a great game, and indeed, even with the cards, it was a very, very good game of rugby, a very high quality game of rugby. I see the frustration of people who think who see that this is gonna, it didn't ruin the game, but it certainly had a material effect on the game, and I accept that, and I also fully accept that none of the players involved had any kind of malice aforethought or any kind of intent. But it's just the regulatory environment we work in now.
But what I was going to say was, I accept that fellas of Stephen Ferris's vintage and older are going to be upset by it, because it was how you did it back in the day. But there wasn't a gathering storm in both American football and rugby now
and in soccer,
concussive legislation or litigation, should I say, coming down the road. So you've got to not only be squeaky clean, but you've got to be seen to be squeaky clean. And if you're not seen to be trying to stamp stuff out, like lowering the tackle height, all of those things, anything that's in danger of any concussive impact, then you're not at the races. Like it or not, it's going to change our game. Either fellas who are from the past are going to be dragged kicking and screaming, or people who have that attitude are going to be dragged kicking and screaming through it, and everybody else is going to just be going there anyway. So doing nothing is not an option,
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, anyway, back to the rugby. I mean, whatever about the cards, I suppose, as we said, probably all of them were justified. I think maybe O'Brien was very fortunate to only get a yellow, not a red, under the letter of the law.
I do think it was funny that. So you're going to mention it. Go on ahead.
No, I was just going to say, mention Toner. I mean, Toner's been playing pro rugby for 15 years, and he's 6'10", and he was tackling a lad 5'3". Well, maybe a bit taller than that. But
he was the biggest player on the pitch, on the smallest player on the pitch.
Yeah, Yeah, and like the guy ducked as well. So he had. I was going to say that like Toner has been playing for so long, you'd think that he could adjust, but in saying that, he did have to get down a seriously long way down to hit the daisy cutter.
I'd say if Toner was on his knees, he'd still be able to hit Michael Lowry high.
Yeah, I think you're right. But like still, there was lots of action in the game. I thought, when I saw the team selected, I thought, oh, we could be in trouble here. And as it turned out, the opening 13 minutes, they flew into a 12-0 lead. And I thought, oh God, my premonition is coming true. And it wasn't to do, like, I mean, Toner was off at that stage, but like they didn't score from the 13th minute until the 72nd minute. And we've seen teams being smothered by Leinster this season. We've seen it particularly in Munster twice. You know, like I'm talking about the teams that Leinster are going to be competing with rather than annihilating, as there's a good few in the league that they do that too. But the ones that they're competing against, the Munsters and the Ulsters, like Munster had in the two matches, the match I think in certainly there was one in the Aviva that they didn't score. They went in, they got a lead at the start, and they didn't score for a huge chunk of the match. And I'm sure there was a second Munster match. It was a similar situation. But you can't go the 13 minutes to the 72nd minute and not score and expect to be competitive against Leinster.
Well, it's to the game against was it the final, the Pro 14 final against Ulster? I think they scored in the 4th minute and then didn't score again. Look, what that game.
We only played them twice. We only played them once this season, and that was in Thomond. The game you're referring to is the semi-final. Although it was technically this season, well, it was technically not this season.
Back since lockdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what we saw was something that we're all as former forwards fond of pointing out, that forwards win matches.
Yeah,
and for all the callousness in areas of the Leinster team, the front five that Leinster put out on the pitch had no callousness in it whatsoever. It was a strong front five. Ulster didn't have that luxury. Their front five just isn't at that level. Not yet, anyway. Guys like O'Sullivan and O'Toole are good prospects, but they're not at the level that, you know. I mean, we can lose a guy like we can have a guy like Byrne. We can lose a guy like Dooley and replace them for one another. I mean, obviously there's a situation at tight head. So Michael Bent has if anyone ever doubted Michael Bent's legendary status, I think the last 18 months or so have demonstrated it. John came up with the term for him. He's the best third choice tight head prop in Europe, and I don't think there can be any question of that. But I mean, what happened was we ground them out of it. Our pack just absolutely ground them out of it. The back row superb. Scott Penny was excellent again at number 8, and you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your backs are, and Ulster's backs are very, very good, as we saw on the couple of occasions when they did get the ball. If you don't have the ball, it doesn't matter how good your backs are, because you know you can't do anything.
I think I did say it to you before the game that you know, I might have used the first part of the cliche, forwards decide who wins, and that was really why I didn't have too many worries about us. And that was before we made a comeback. Well, we still had a man down. I think we went ahead when we still had a man when Toner was in the bin, or someone was in the bin anyway. Just looking at our pack and looking at their pack, I think I said it before the game. Who would you choose? Coetzee? Anyone else? Would you take it? You could argue over a couple more, maybe.
You could argue,
but not really. Like so. And when Coetzee went off for them, then that was game over, really, in terms of the packs. Yeah, okay, if their backs got a shitload of possession, just like Scotland, which we'll probably come on to, if Scotland get a load of possession in the backs, they could rip us asunder on Saturday or Sunday. It's the same thing if Ulster got a load of possession, but we were never giving them that possession. And we played that what you call puke rugby, the Exeter game, mauled them over from 2 yards. We played that against them and just ground them into the dirt. You know, it'll be interesting when we come up against the actual Exeter, see what happens there between the two of us.
It will indeed. But like I'm not sure. I'm presuming that O'Sullivan went off as a tactical substitute rather than as an injury.
Was it not something to do with the Warwick?
No,
So-
Warwick replaced O'Sullivan after 25 minutes. And Warwick got sent off after 30.
Sorry,
So
wrong way around. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I don't know. Like their scrum was under pressure, and maybe they decided that they needed to make that change because O'Sullivan, he's got a lot of potential, but he's obviously
Hello.
wasn't up for the game on last Saturday night, and which is kind of worrying when you think that he was in the Irish squad, and he's obviously, you know what I mean. He's if you've been substituted in a Pro 14 match when you're playing Leinster's third choice front row, it's a bit concerning.
Yeah, but it was the best third choice tight head in Europe. Remember?
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I mean, Ben has turned into a really top level operator at the scrum, and Eric O'Sullivan isn't the first guy and won't be the last guy that he's pretzeled.
Yeah, sure. What about the Balak? Another talking point. I mean, I foolishly decided to go on to the UAFC. Is that what it's called? The Ulster Fans Forum.
Alternative Ulster.
Yeah, that's an eye-opening website. But it's probably a bit unfair. It was probably only 2 or 3 posters who are
nutters.
Who are nutcases.
Yeah, they're nutters, but also they're having a laugh. Not a very PC laugh, in fairness to them.
But they're kind of suggesting that it was a sectarian decision, that Frank Murphy is corrupt. That
I think they're taking the piss myself.
Okay, fine. It doesn't come across very well if you're kind of.
I think it's one thing I think we can all agree on. Our prods are better than their prods.
And our tags are better than their tags too. But anyway,
well, that was one thing. That was another thing that they did bring up, that basically get rid of anyone from the south and keep their own lads. Anyway, look.
It's a Planet Rugby thing. I think they're all ex-Planet Rugby guys who just go out of their way to take the piss. And one incident that was causing them a lot of consternation was Balakhume's disallowed try. What are your views on that? I don't blame them.
I'd be very annoyed if it was ruled off against us, but absolutely. I think it's interesting that I think that if you were to name the 10 best experts on crossing and what's legal in the world, 4 of them would be Felipe Contepomi, Gordon Darcy, Brian O'Driscoll, and Alan Gaffney. And Gordon Darcy was speaking on as a pundit, and he was reviewing it, and he was quite clear that it was crossing. I mean, because a lot of what Leinster's, like that Gaffney loop that was hugely successful for Leinster, was dependent on being right on the edge but not over it in terms of crossing and blocking and offside and stuff like that. So if Darce, who would be an expert, reckons it was crossing, then it was crossing.
Fair enough. It was marginal enough, and the argument is, did your man run into Ruddock, or could Ruddock have avoided him? And the one school of thought will say, well, Ruddock tackled him without the ball before he just bit down, and the other school of thought will say, well, he kind of ran into him and left Ruddock with no choice and therefore blocked Ruddock. And yeah, I can see both sides, but
I think Ruddock made a decision and tackled him. But I also think that watching the game again and listening to the conversation between the officials, they were cognizant of that, and that didn't come into it. That isn't a factor. It's, Ruddock wasn't presented with the choice to make the legal tackle or the other tackle, because he ran, or the line he ran, Ruddock. And then what happened is Balakhume went behind him. That's always a mistake.
Yeah.
If it happened, if we had tried chalked off because of a similar thing, I'd be very annoyed. I'd also be very annoyed if we ran a backs move that ended up like that, because it's a lack of precision.
Yeah.
I thought it looked a bit sloppy, and it meant that the referee had to make that decision. Whereas when Leinster run it, or teams that run it perfectly, it probably is blocking, but it's camouflaged so well that it's the referee can't make that choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's like I always say, and I said it before about cards, that if you ask the ref a question, you've only got a 50-50 chance you're going to get the answer you like.
Precisely. I haven't seen much of Max O'Reilly, and you know, I was kind of a bit skeptical of his defense in the tiny amount of time I've seen him. I think it might have been either the Ospreys or Scarlets away, but in attack he looks very, very good going forward, and his beautiful offload over the shoulder for Luke McGrath running through was beautiful. I mean, and like, you know, we saw it in the Six Nations already with DuPont doing it, and you know, I'm sure there's plays being written in Toulouse about it, whereas, you know, he's our, I don't know, third choice, let's say, fullback. You know, he's only got 5 caps for Leinster. And yes, that was a thing of magnificent beauty as well. As you say, Porn, it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was absolutely. I wasn't sure was it him. I confused himself and Jimmy O'Brien a few times during the game, and when I saw it initially, I thought because it's a 13 and a 15 on their back, and it was definitely Max O'Reilly, and it was splendid.
Well, it would be easy to get confused because you have to. If you look at that again, and you look at O'Reilly's work rate in that just phase of play, he wins the catch from the what you call it, the box kick. Then he hits the next ruck. And then he loops around to take that ball. That's brilliant work rate from a young guy. That really, really is. I mean, 3 involvements. Yeah. Oh, you know, it's absolutely, it's really top notch.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just the final note, I suppose, you mentioned him already, Dave. Scott Penny was once again
on fire,
outstanding. I mean, and like we kind of mentioned, he was playing at number 8. Coetzee, he did score the opening try for Ulster. He went off early, but Scott Penny looks like he's born to play in that company, you know, with the even with in the back row that month that Ulster had at the end. You know, Timoney's a good player. We know about Jordy Murphy, like, and you know, he's only 21 and he just looks outstanding.
Well, do you remember I texted you because I had 3 tries, and the bonus point was in the bag because Scott Penny hadn't scored yet, because he always scores, and then he didn't bloody well score at all, which is unusual for him. But I thought he's really, really excellent. He's got to be playing. If there were a summer tour this year for Ireland, he'd be going on it.
Lions Bolter, Dave. Lions Bolter, Dave.
No.
So that victory obviously moves us up into.
I just want to say, like, from an Ulster perspective, I mean, having Balakoon back is a big boost. He looked really, really good. He was a threat every time. Obviously, he scored 1 try, kind of scored another try. And I thought Stockdale looked back in form. I mean, a lot of ball didn't come his way and stuff like that, but there were 1 or 2 incidents, things that he had been criticised for in the past, like not going down on balls and stuff like that he was doing really well. Like he was dropping to reclaim balls. So it looks like he's coming back to a little bit of form as well, which is only good for Ireland.
And he's been brought up into the Irish squad, but there was that incident that you said he tracked back and cleaned up a ball on his own line, got out of the danger zone. And then there was another one where he actually, I think we subsequently scored, but he held up O'Brien just on the line and he flipped him onto his back. But I think that the next ruck or whatever, I can't remember who went over.
It was a nice piece of defense.
There was good defense there, though. Okay, so we were in the final now. We'll talk about that when it comes around. But we take on Munster. They beat Connacht 2017. Once again, Joey Carberry came back, and ultimately his penalty was the difference between the 2 sides. But one kind of thing that I did, and Joey also, was the Connacht second rows were absolutely excellent. Delan and particularly Thornbury like they destroyed the Munster line out,
I've never seen a Munster.
and it might be a
so well.
chink of light.
Yeah, they really took it apart.
Yeah, it's funny. Thornbury and Tyburn were coming through the academy at the same. I'm not sure if they're in exactly the same year. If not, they were only a year apart. But I think one of them had to repeat, or got to get a fourth year in the academy because of injury. They were both suffered a lot with injury on the way through the academy, and that's why they never really got a fair shake. And Thornbury ended up going to New Zealand, and obviously we all know where the other lad went, over to Scarletania. But it's just interesting now that the two of them have come so good. Like Thornbury's the kind of guy who, at 6'8", and he's a big lad now, but he was a bit lanky when he was in the academy. He hadn't filled out a frame that big. Unless you're James Ryan or Superman, you're not going to fill it that quickly. And now he has done, and he's a serious piece of kit now. I'd be very happy to have him back at Leinster if we didn't have the Jack Dunns, etc. of the world coming through. He's a great piece of business, and they've just renewed their contracts today. I think was it centre round, Jason? They've signed 21 players. Or re-signed 21 players, which is a great bit of business for Connacht. So hopefully, Sorry, Dave.
Alex Wootton has converted his loan deal into a permanent one.
Yeah. So nice bit of biz, Connacht, and nearly a nice bit of biz against Munster. You know, they gave him a good scare. And like you say, Joey Carberry's penalty was the difference. I didn't see the whole game. I was in and out, but yeah, it was a good show. It's like the Irish teams are.
I thought
really
Connacht played some pretty brainless rugby on occasion. I mean, you've got an opposition line out that you're demolishing. Why aren't you kicking for touch? They were kicking to keep the ball in play? And the best player on the Munster team, I thought, was Mike Halley.
Who scored that try when they let him run through, basically.
So why kick away from their weaknesses and towards their strengths? I just couldn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there was one beautiful piece of continuity play though. It was kind of an interchange between Callum Blade and I think Jack Carty was involved in it a couple of times. I think it was just leading up to the point where your man Kute was sin-binned. But if that play had been allowed to develop, I think it might have been, not that they do it really in rugby, but if they had try of the month, it certainly would have been up there. It was a great break. But like interestingly, Munster now finished with the exact same, or still there's 2 more games to go. But this was another oil in the fire of the UAFC. Munster and Ulster have the same points, and I thought it was actually quite surprising that even Ulster's coach came out and said that there should be a playoff, which I thought was mad. Like we all know the rules as how the league is formatted this year. It's the same for everybody. We're all playing to the same sets. This is the rules. Mightn't be ideal, but it's what everyone has signed up to. But both Munster and Ulster currently have played 14, won 12 on 54 points with 6 bonus points. So one team's in the final, one's going home to lick their wounds.
Imagine how they'll feel if Ulster sleepy night for the remainder of the regular season, and Ulster finish with a superior points total or whatever. They'll be shitting on their babies up there then, so they will.
It will be funny. I'm going to stick, lads, because we've obviously got a lot of stuff to get through. So I want to stick just briefly with the next week's games. So we play Zebre on Friday. An early kickoff, 5:45. There is 48 points between us and Zebre in the table. We're on 65, they're on 17. So it's 48 points which separates the 2 teams. But like Zebre have improved this year. They've won 4 matches, which is a good step up for them over the last few years. We know the team. We've made 7 changes in the pack. Just the only one that remains the same as Scott Penny, and they've only made 1 change in the back. Harry Byrne comes in for his brother at out half, but they've kept the other places in the backs the same. But there's a couple of debuts, and there's a couple of boys that are making their first start. New number 8, Alex. I can't pronounce his name, Dave. Soroka, is it?
Soroka.
It's pronounced like it's spelled, Jay.
Soroka. Yeah, he's already played 1 game, but there are 2 lads on the bench who
came on, but this is first start. Yeah, there's Sean O'Brien and Tim Corkery are on the bench.
Sean O'Brien, the 4th, who's a proper back row this time. The one in Connacht is a back row, second row / blindside second row, and the other chap is a centre. So Sean O'Brien, number 4, is at least in the right position to be a Sean O'Brien, shall we say?
Yeah.
And the other chap, Corkery, is a club guy, Kilkenny RFC, I believe. Quite a young. He's a year younger than Scott Penny, so he's quite a young guy.
He was in the 20s last year. He's a good player.
He sounds good. I haven't seen him do anything. I saw a few highlights on somebody put up highlights of him a couple of years ago in the schools, or in the not schools but the Ireland youths, which he looked tasty enough. And your man Jamie Osborne was on the same team, who we've already seen plenty of this year. And he looked even bigger by comparison to the other players, and he looks big even now in professional rugby. He looks like a big fella. But anyway, it'd be good to see those 2 make their debut. It's one of those games. All we really want to do is not get Luke McGrath injured. That's the sole focus of this game, and preferably anybody else like Scott Penny maybe, or But Luke McGrath is the one that we really don't have any backup for going into the really rough matches, because let's face it, we've got Scotland this weekend, we've got England, then we've got Munster in the final, then we've got 2 rounds of Europe, and then God knows.
Hopefully.
Well, potentially 2 rounds, at least 1 round, when we hopefully give Toulouse a pasting for the first time ever. We've never beaten Toulouse. But anyway, that's basically all we're out to do this weekend, is get as few injuries as possible. It doesn't matter if we lose 470-0. It really doesn't.
I think there might be Stuart's inquiry if we lost 470-0.
You know what I mean, though? It's completely irrelevant. Like, it really doesn't matter. I mean, not even going to dent our team ethos.
It's actually a great opportunity for guys like Max O'Reilly,
exactly.
Jack Doyle, Clarence.
There's 9
Soroka.
players. There's 9 players with combined total of 40 appearances for Leinster, and probably a good chunk of those are off the bench. So we mentioned last week about how important it was, and we saw Frawley, who's probably 1 tier above a lot of those lads, how important it was and what it meant to him missing out the previous week when he cried off during the warm-up. So, this is a massive opportunity for a load of these guys. Marcus Hannon, 1 cap, Alex Soroka, 1 cap, Sean O'Brien, 0, Tim Corkery, 0. Even, we mentioned them earlier, Max O'Reilly, 5 caps. These guys are very, very inexperienced. And this is their World Cup final. Do you know what I mean? This is huge for them. And it's their opportunity. Some of them, I'm sure, are playing for contracts and playing for getting promoted out of the academy. Otherwise, it could be all for nothing to say, oh yeah, I tugged out for Leinster a couple of times as he's sitting at the, in the canteen in an office in a couple of years' time if it doesn't work out for him. So this is pretty big for a lot of these guys.
There's also the thing where, when the internationals come back and are back around the place, those young guys can go, well, they go, well, we did our bit, lads. Now it's up to you. And it kind of puts that kind of moral pressure on the senior team.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned it earlier, we saw the draw on Tuesday, the Heineken Cup draw. That we've obviously got Toulon. And should we win that, we've got either Exeter or Lyon the following week. So again, as you said, vast majority of the Irish squad is made up of Leinster players. Then we have a Pro 14 final, and then we have 2 matches in Europe. So
Potentially.
do the coaches say, yeah, potentially, okay, but do the coaches then say, right, some guys, like, for example, James Ryan has played, 2 Ireland internationals. He's definitely going to play against Toulon. Are we going to possibly rest him? If so, you're looking down the team sheet, you're going, Ross Maloney, you've done a lot of work to get us into this position. Show us how good you are today. And maybe you've got a place in the Pro 14 final. Do you know what I mean? You could be given a little carrot to fellas who've put in a lot of the work to get the team to the Pro 14 final.
Do you know what I think they're going to do, should do, I'm not sure which way to put it, is get guys like Ross Maloney into the starting team and then load the bench with the heaviest hitters you've ever seen in your life. Guys like James Ryan on the bench, that's the kind of thing I think they might do with the Munster game, because we can put out a bloody good team, and if you've got guys like that on the bench, should anything happen, if their breaks are going against them and things are not going well, bring on a James Ryan, a Cian Healy, whoever, a couple of serious dudes that most human beings in the world would cry to see those guys getting, even if they're winning and they see guys like that coming on. It's a serious kick in the nuts. So I can see that as a strategy. It'll be certainly mine if I was in Leo and Stuart and Felipe's shoes, because they are going to have a few hard weeks playing for Ireland. And if they're starting all the games in the Six Nations, then they're going to be. I don't think the IRFU are necessarily going to legislate a rest for them, but I think that they're going to have to be rested if we're going to, do well in Europe. So we'll see what happens.
I think there's a lot of factors coming into it. Obviously, they'll be coming out of Ireland camp. We don't know what kind of injuries they're going to take. We don't know what kind of stresses they're under. I mean, there's a lot of medical information that the coaches see, blood tests and all that kind of stuff. They'll know how fit those guys are, how much they have left in the tank. And then there's also the idea of selection and blending the team and getting ready. There's so many factors, it's almost impossible to predict what they'll do. I would suggest that probably they'll come somewhere close to what you're suggesting, John, where, they'll have a strong core to the team against Munster. They'll have the rest of the guys on the bench in a break glass in case of emergency situation, and then everybody will be fully fired for Toulon.
Yep.
Like we saw it even in last year's Pro 14 final when they gave Ross Byrne the starting berth and Johnny was on the bench. I don't know what's going to happen, but you could see similar, maybe not the out half, but you might see other positions that you might raise an eyebrow to say that has he starting above him. And
Craig Casey.
What's that?
Munster have Craig Casey.
They do. And that leads me nicely on to
Craig Casey
our game against Scotland.
So Craig Casey's a super talented young fella, really, really is. But my God, they boiled the arse from the other week on Air Sports. They really did.
Mm. Yeah, well, like I suppose just turning our attention to the Scotland-Ireland game, he is one. I mean, I suppose I got a text of a team which was the exact replica of the team that was selected with one exception, and then I got a further update that night before saying that Murray had cried off and the Casey was subbed up, and that's what happened. So, like, Murray had been selected according to my text
Your source.
yet. You know, obviously. So does he come? Deep throat. But does he come back in then for next Sunday's fixture? You know, and then do they drop Gibson Park to the bench? Do they drop them all together with Casey and bring Casey in? There's a good chance Casey's not going to be in the starting 20 or the playing 23.
Yeah, I think Casey's had his go now, and he's had his bit of hype, and he's, you know, and fabulous prospect. Great to see him come through for Ireland. Gibson Park is 29. He's not going to play for Ireland forever, and he's in that cohort of fellas who are like, he's a great guy to bring off the bench, and we've said it loads of times.
He also played very, very well. He played really well against Italy. People forget that. I mean, in all the hype about Casey, people forget that Gibson Park was absolutely fucking brilliant for 70 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But there's a balance to be had there. If Murray's playing, one of them has to lose out. If Murray's even on the bench, one of them has to lose out. And I would suggest that at this stage of his career, it'll be Craig Casey that does. Could be wrong, but that's what I'd be doing if I was Andy Farrell. Great guy for the future.
Like Andy Farrell. Like, lads, Andy Farrell is under so much pressure.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know, we spoke about, like, Leinster playing a cup final in a few weeks. This is his cup final. Like, they lose this game, I'd say they're going to sack him, but it's going to make every match then he subsequently manages Ireland in, it's going to be ratcheted up the pressure. He wins this game, you know, you've got England at home, so, you know, it's not exactly England are, you know, they were in the World Cup final 18 months ago. They've won the Grand Slam last year. They are a pretty good team. Going through a bit of a dip at the moment, fair enough. But, like, lose this match against Scotland, then it could be, I won't say curtains, it's not going to be curtains, but it's just going to make his life very, very difficult. So he's not going to be going, oh, well, I'll play Craig Casey because he's going to be a great player in 2 years' time, and it's going to really stand to him. He's going to say, I need results right now. I don't care about anything else. You know, the result on Sunday is all that matters.
Yeah, well, he's not going to get sacked for losing this game, but he would have got sacked for losing 2 weeks ago against Italy. You could bet your bottom dollar. And yeah, I agree with you that every game he wins now, there's less pressure on him, but every game he loses, like, he hasn't got a lot of margin for error.
I mean, if we come out
exactly, yeah, like
one win, he's under a lot of pressure, an awful lot of pressure.
Yeah. He needs this win. He needs this win, and he's not going to be, you know, saying, "Oh, let's bring up young Shanahan or Sheehan into the team." You know, he's going to say, like, it's not going to happen, or he's not going to say, "Let's start Ryan Baird." No way. You know,
Six Nations games.
It's going to be ultra.
Six Nations games are our bread and butter.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I mean, you might see Healy come back in for Kilcoyne, or you might see Furlong instead of Porter, that kind of thing. But I don't think you're going to see anything radical. But, like, you know, there's a lot of hype about Scotland in the last couple of weeks. I mean, they absolutely blew a golden opportunity against Wales. How they lost that match, and like, they had already started to like, Wales had come back before the red card. It wasn't the red card was the changing point. The red card made it more difficult for Scotland for sure, but Wales had already got back into that match before the red card happened. Like, they had a great result against England. But, like, we've seen that there's something going on with England at the moment. Like, whether it's the fact that there's 5 or 6 lads playing for Saracens that are
huge
just
factor.
that haven't played any other matches. It has to be a factor. It has to be. But, like,
and Sarries got beaten.
But
by the Cornish pirates. Arr!
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Jason. There is something that's not quite right in that England camp. I'm not suggesting that the coach has lost the camp, but I think that the absence of game time for so many of their key players is key. I mentioned last week, I think it was, about Itoje's timing being off because of, and my belief is that's because of a lack of game time. And I think that is a factor. They're also missing guys like Manu Tuilagi, who are huge players for them. I mean, he gives them so much carry, he gives them so much carry forward. And then again, the lack of game time affecting guys like Vinny Vunipola. Vinny Vunipola is one of those guys who, gets fit through playing. There are guys like that. You see them all through the game. So, with him not playing, it's very hard on him. So the England team just isn't right at this point in time. So, I mean, and fair play to Scotland for beating them. It doesn't matter. They could get it right by the time we come around, which is why I'm worried about, a one-win season. A one-win season would make it very, very hard for Farrell. It would make it very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's kind of a replica of what we saw in December. They kind of had a couple of iffy, they obviously were beaten by England, and then an iffy result against Georgia. And then there was that final, or was it the third, fourth playoff match against Scotland in the Aviva in December. But we won pretty comfortably. I think it was 31-16. And actually it was interesting. Eddie O'Sullivan, do you remember after the match, he kind of had a bit of a go at Scotland.
Yeah.
And Hogg was going, well, we should have won that game. And, then O'Sullivan kind of fired a bit of a shot over the bows, basically saying you kind of think a bit highly of yourself. And that kind of hype is starting again, and particularly in some of the sections of the Irish press. I think they just, as usual, want to see the Irish rugby team, or maybe a successful team. They want to get a bit of a story and muddy the waters a little bit, and just see how things go if there's a defeat.
There's two things going to sell papers: a successful Irish team, or there's two things that are going to sell papers: a successful Irish team or an unsuccessful Irish team. A 3-win season isn't going to sell a whole lot of papers.
Yeah, what's his name was on Ian Henderson was on the news earlier, gone on about how we have to beat Scotland up front, and that other teams have been cut apart by them if they don't get beaten up front, and that we've made them look average in previous games, but it's only because we've really, really stuck it to them up front, and if we give them an inch, they'll run all over us. And it says a lot about how Ireland are going to play. It's going to be more brutal up front, kick the shite out of them rugby. Or maybe it isn't. Maybe that's a thought.
I think Ian was been deliberately disingenuous there. I think maybe he wants Scotland to try and take us on up front, and
could be.
He wants to move them away from what they may consider to be their best game plan, to try and reassert their manhood or something. I don't know. I happen to think our backline isn't all that bad. I mean, it's not terrible or anything. I mean, it's not as good as the guys who play for Glasgow and Edinburgh, okay? But, they do play for a team that's, not bad.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Dave. But they do have Exeter's best fullback, who is inspired, and Racing Metro's.
He's in the form of his career for Scotland, certainly. Anyway, he's in absolute blinding form at the moment. He's nailed on line starter.
And Finn Russell is the kind of a guy who needs to play in France because,
nowhere else to put up with him.
Well, it's like France in general. You don't know which Finn Russell is going to show up, to use the French team cliche.
Not only does he need to play in France, John, he needs to play for Racing.
Perhaps.
Because I mean, if ever a player and a club were made for one another, it's Racing and Finn Russell. I mean, would anyone have any question or any problem seeing Finn Russell turning up for a match on a bicycle with a pink dicky bow?
Mrs. Russell, maybe, I don't know.
Well, no, but I mean, we're talking about the traditional Racing, the little traditions around Racing and their jouet approach.
Champagne at halftime.
Which is generally lost to a Perdue approach.
Very good, Dave. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so teams for Saturday, they haven't been announced yet. They quite often announced, or for Sunday, yeah. That's probably why they haven't been announced.
When they certainly didn't announce it for Saturday.
No, definitely not. No, it keeps catching me out,
Well,
that one.
I had a look at the teams that were the match against Wales. I had a look at the Scottish team. So there were 6 players that played a rugby outside Scotland. Only 2 of their forwards do. So 6 of their pack, or their starting pack against that match against Wales, were based in Scotland. The nine of their entire team were in Scotland. It was 4 Edinburgh and 5 Glasgow. So, like, Glasgow are 4th in the Pro 14 in their conference, with 4 wins from the 13 games they've played, and Edinburgh are 5th in their conference. So, like, even in the whole 23, the match day 23, it was 15 of them are based in Scotland. And there's a further one. One of the Blade Thompson plays for Scarlets. So we play against him on a fairly regular basis for a pretty lackluster Scarlets team, 3rd in their conference. Like, okay, you've got Hogg and Gray both play for Exeter, European and English and European champions. You mentioned Finn Russell plays in Racing, can be good, can be bad sometimes. But, like, I really don't get where the hype is for Scotland. I just don't get it. Because if you look at
Hamish Watson. It's all on Hamish
players
Watson.
on paper, they're
And
just,
the centre.
they're average. They mainly play for. Would Hamish Watson get in the Leinster back row?
No one getting the Leinster back row.
Even Leinster players can't get into the Leinster back
The
row.
Leinster back row can't even get in the Leinster back row, for God's sake. I think we seem to be having issues with, I think it might be the weather. That's our exchanges are, you seem to be frozen there, Jason.
Yeah.
Are you back?
Are you back with us?
Yeah, yeah.
It's probably the weather on your broadband, Jay. You need to send a Sherpa
my
on
daughter using up all of the internet.
Yeah, I'd say there's wild weather conditions, difference in weather conditions between me and the 500 meter away in a straight line, Jason.
Yeah, you don't have a daughter who's sucking the whole internet in either, though.
No, that's true. But
you don't.
Yeah, no, it's a good question where the hype around Scotland has come from. Obviously, the performance against England, the performance ultimately.
Yeah, but it was
Wales was good.
Dave, sorry, it was 11-6. It was 11-6 against England. Like, it wasn't, a landslide. It was one score essentially.
Oh no, I agree, but it was a good performance, Jay. That's the thing.
Very good. Yeah.
So that's where a lot of it comes from. We'll see. I mean, Ireland have never been overly happy going to Murrayfield. It's different now with the with the lack of crowds and stuff. But we've a bit of a mixed record over there. I'm sure John knows can elucidate more on that. But we haven't got the greatest.
Well, I had a look back. If we look at I think there was 12. We played 12 significant matches. There was a couple of rugby warm-ups which I've ignored.
Yeah.
But we've played 12 significant matches since they beat us in Croke Park. So they beat us in 2010, 2013, and 2017. So we've played 12 games. We've won 9. They've won 3.
Oh.
So 2 of those matches were.
We do have the greatest
17
record.
And 30. So they've won twice in Edinburgh.
No, fair enough.
In those,
I thought
in those 11 or 12 years.
Yeah, no,
I would have said that was a thing in the past, all right.
Yeah, I think we've finished above them in every Six Nations bar one. I think it was 2013 since it changed from the 5 to the Six Nations, and I think that they beat us for like 10 or 12 years in the 90s and late 80s. So there was a massive change of fortune. I actually went over to the Ireland-Scotland match in '99, and I think they won that was their last time that Scotland won the Six. It was 5 Nations at the time.
Was.
But that was the last time they won it. but like they were a fairly formidable outfit back then. I think they beat us in 01 as well in the foot and mouth game.
Yeah.
But like they've had a pretty poor run of results in those 20 years since. But look, you don't know what's going to happen, but I really just don't get the hype. I mean, if all of our players were playing down in with Exeter or in Toulouse or someone like that, you'd say, wow, yeah, maybe so. But like we play so many of their players for the last 15 years in the Celtic League, and they've done really relatively nothing. Like they've won, was it one Pro 14 in that time? They've been in a couple of finals. But like, and that's only glad. I mean, Edinburgh have done really nothing.
2015 against Munster in Ravenhill.
Yeah.
I think.
So like I know we beat them in a final in 14 and
So,
another
18.
final in 19. 18 was it?
I think you're right. 19.
Yeah, so like
19. You're right.
yeah, so like I mean, I don't really see them in world beaters. And as I said, as the fact that they've got so many to play on those teams, and particularly this season, how mediocre and average they've been. But we'll see.
It's hard. It's hard to disagree with that, Jason. Particularly since I didn't even know the record, so I'm not in much of a position to disagree with it. But no, the points you make are particularly valid. And I do think there's a rush. Okay, Ireland haven't played particularly well this season, but it's not because we're not a good team, and it's not because we don't have good players. We just haven't played particularly well. It'll be interesting to see now what they do on Sunday, because there are players coming back into the fold, like Balakoon, like Stockdale. Certainly, Stockdale would have considered himself a starter up until his injury. He's back in the fold. Keith Earls is there. James Lowe. One of them's going to lose out. At least one of them's going to lose out. So Jordan Larmour too. So there's a lot of there are some imponderables on that wing. I don't see a lot of changes anywhere else, to be honest with you. From what would be considered our first team, I could see Healy coming back in. I could see one of the props coming back in, and pretty much that's it. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how because the one, as you mentioned, the big threat they do have is Hamish Watson. Be interesting to see what Ireland do at Owens, because they do have options. Ireland do have a lot of options that they could, play with.
Will Connors, if you want to stop Hamish Watson. We'll see. Josh van der Fleer, if you want to play a different type of game.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's legion options, and Scott Penny hasn't even been capped yet. Sure, he could beat Scotland on his own at this stage, for God's sake.
Well, John, that's ridiculous. Don't say it like that. Now, if he had Craig Casey with him.
Yeah. Anyway, I was going to say about Stockdale during the Ulster thing is great that he's coming back into a bit of form, and great that we're getting a bit of a challenge in the back three. But what really strikes me about him is that he's absolutely fabulous going forward, and especially he's a confident player too. So when he's in form, he's in super form. He seems to have the ball on a string, like that. Like his try won us, and his kick and chase won us the game against New Zealand. The only time we ever beat them at home. So his attacking prowess is money in the bank. However, what strikes me about him is that he doesn't get involved in it. If the ball doesn't reach him, he doesn't go looking for it like a James Lowe or and he has similar defensive frailties to James Lowe as well. But James Lowe has a bit more commitment. I think James Lowe's frailties are to do with fitting into a system rather than anything else. He never lacks commitment. His defensive frailties are not that he's afraid to tackle someone. They're all positional, and they're all. Whereas Stockdale, I just think he's a bit of a passenger sometimes. And if the ball doesn't get out to him on the wing, he's not going looking for it. We can have a game where you hardly see him. That game against us, when he played for Ulster, he wasn't to the fore. I mean, it's not that he wasn't anonymous or anything, but he wasn't an Ireland starter in those two teams. He should have been much more to the fore, seeing as he's an Ireland starter in those two teams.
Is that to do with the guy, or is that to do with the way he's used?
I don't know. I really genuinely don't know. But he's not inclined to go looking for work if he's not getting it handed to him. Is my impression.
I think Lowe is. I think there's the Lowe that plays for Leinster and there's the Lowe that plays for Ireland, and they're quite different.
No,
I've never seen James Lowe kick the ball as much in the 3 and a bit years I've seen him playing while at Leinster as he has for Ireland. And
sure,
like he would pop up in between the two centres for Leinster. I don't think I've seen him do that. Maybe in his opening match that we played against, I think his first match was in those autumn games against Wales. And I think he was a bit more like the Leinster James Lowe, but I think he has slipped into a kind of a Stockdale and just sits on his wing and doesn't really get involved when he plays for Ireland.
Well, do you know what it is? Well, the combination of factors, and the ones you mentioned are obviously part of it. The strategy of the team is hugely part of it, and you know what he's directed to do by Andy Farrell or Mike Cutt are a huge part of it. But do you remember when he came to Leinster first? It took him a long while to bed in with the defensive system, and I remember one of the coaches talking about it and saying that he's the kind of guy that you actually have to take him out in the field and show him. He doesn't get like he it comes very naturally to him. Rugby comes really naturally to him.
A learning by doing kind of guy.
Yeah, and learning on a blackboard or a whiteboard just doesn't seem to work for the guy. So you literally that's why it takes him a few games to get into the defensive swing. And obviously Ireland have a different defensive system to Leinster. So that's going to take him a little while to bed in. But when he beds in, watch out.
I think there's a different system. I think what you say, John, I agree with 100%. I think Ireland, international rugby and club rugby are different anyway, and certainly Leinster and Ireland are different. I think club rugby is a bit more bebop, whereas international rugby is a bit more swing. You know, everything in its role, everything in its place. It's regimented, and it's whereas in club rugby you can kind of go off soloing on a theme. But you can't really do. I mean, James Lowe is Charlie Parker,
I'm not sure all of our rugby audience are going to be too enamored with those references, but I like them.
Well, if they're not, then they should get informed on Charlie Parker and Miles Davis and the development of bebop and hard bop. I'm telling you,
it's a minority sport, Dave. You think rugby's a minority sport? Jazz is much more of a minority sport. But anyway, carry on.
Are you telling me there's no fans out that, for example, Jason doesn't have a load of jazz mags? Oh, sorry, no, I pronounced that wrong. Sorry, go on.
Jason is not from New Zealand. If he was.
Just I can't spell. Okay, boys. Just very briefly, just a quick prediction for the 3 Six Nation games.
Ireland by a reasonable amount, 7-10. We'll give it. Wales will thump Italy, of course. Les Crunch will be a very interesting one because Wales and France are the only ones on a slam, and England are in shit form. So you'd have to say Les Crunch will go to France, but you just never know. England could be a wounded beast who just come into form just before they play us.
Remember how hard England found it to put away a very relatively understrength. No, very understrength. I'm going to put very understrength French team in the final of the ANZ.
Yeah.
So I think that those guys would be looking for their shot,
Is it in France or England?
Twickers.
That might even think a little bit, but with COVID, perhaps not. There won't be any chariots or any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I find it hard to look past the French. So yeah, France, Wales, and Ireland. I'm going.
I would concur with all of those.
Yeah, that's 3-way wins, so lads. And that's what I would have gone for as well.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Just shows you
Well,
what
boys,
the
as
golf
ever.
does.
Yeah. That's it. And that'll be the first time ever that I think I said that, yeah, it will be the first time that will be 3 away wins in the Six Nations. Anyway, boys, as ever, thanks a million. Thanks very much for watching. Follow us if you're following us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. Please give a like, subscription, or thumbs up. Thanks again. Cheers.